if you begin in a attacking way or a harsh tone, and you put your spouse on edge by maybe saying you statements, well, you always do this, you're going to more than likely have a negative response.
You know, Dr. John Gottman has done a lot of research on marriages, and one thing that they have seen is there's a difference in a soft startup or gentle startup versus a harsh startup, and in the way the conversation tends to go. So a harsh startup is something that comes across as abrasive or harsh to the listener. A gentle or soft startup comes across more soft, more vulnerable, and you're more likely to engage.
You know, it's interesting to note that most of the time women are the ones that are bringing up the issues in the relationship, and men are more likely to want to avoid the issues.
Yeah, and that's just the way we're wired. Women tend to be more relational. Now, those roles can flip in a percentage of marriages, but women tend to be the more relational one. Their radars are more sensitive to relationship. And how are we relating? How connected are we? She's a great gauge, actually, if you ever need to know how connected are we. Maybe on a scale of 1 to 10. Because, you know, men typically are going to rank these things as higher than the women. And it's a good thing to know.
Yeah. You know, studies have been done on how conflict goes well or how conflict goes poorly. And one thing that is a predictor of it going poorly is if in the first 3 minutes of the conflict it has a harsh tone or a harsh startup, it doesn't typically turn out well.
If it has the soft startup, like we said, it's more likely to be heard. I mean, this is proven consistently in the research, but guess what else? The way conflict goes in the first 3 minutes can actually be a predictor of divorce. Dr. Gottman and his colleagues have gotten to where they can predict divorce. The last I thought I read was like at a 94% accuracy. Because the thing is, let's face it, you know, we've done a video about the 4 different things: the contempt, the stonewalling, the defensiveness, the, what was the other, criticism.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that damage relationships. When these things are present, like a harsh startup, they have a damaging impact on the relationship.
You know, sometimes a person could say, why are we having this issue? Or why is our marriage relationship going in this direction? Well, if you're doing certain behaviors that are known to end up in this place, then it's just it's just like traveling to a certain city. If you get on this highway and you go in this direction, you're going to end up there. So we know our marriage is going to end up in a certain place if we continue in this direction.
And it says in Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer
turns away wrath.
And so we're talking about a soft response here, a soft startup. And so usually when the women have a harsh startup, it's usually because the man is not addressing issues with her. And, you know, the research even shows that husbands are getting angry with their wives at bringing up these things, and they become unresponsive. They go quiet. They become avoidant. They pull back from the wife because of the way she's coming across, but it actually intensifies. When we talk about the women addressing the issues, they typically have a greater tolerance for the emotions. Like I said, these roles can turn in some marriages, but they have a greater tolerance for the emotions typically than the men do. So the men, who among men don't always deal with emotions, they can become overwhelmed and want to avoid all this emotion and intensity, and they can become flooded by it. And so if a woman can just kind of dial that down, she's more likely to keep a male engaged. You know, and so the components of a soft or gentle startup would be,
I take responsibility for,
or I feel X in this situation, Y, and I need Z, you might say.
It's really best to wait till you're more in control of your feelings and your emotions and can present it in more of an informative kind of fashion.
You know, a wife is usually using the harsh startup because her husband hasn't been responding at a lower level of her sharing, and it's just ramping up, right? And it's getting more intense, but he can improve this by making sure she feels loved, understood, heard.
Some practical application for this could be you may need to set your electronic device aside. You may need to not take a certain phone call. You may need to pay attention with eye contact
Yeah.
and curiosity, asking questions, so that your spouse feels that you're really engaged in the conversation.
Right. But the effects of changing from harsh to soft or gentle startup, you may not notice that immediately because you've created a history, expectations. Your spouse expects it's going to go like this. You're going to find fault with me or criticize me. It's going to explode. So we typically are going to respond to our expectations of where I believe this is going. If you're changed, you're different now, you're going to do it differently. Your spouse, you've betrayed trust on that level. And now you have to rebuild that trust by consistently not going back there again.
Let's look at a couple of scriptures in Proverbs 31. It says, the virtuous woman opens her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is a law of kindness.
She's using kind words when she's talking to her husband.
And then, go ahead.
Well, that's important. And in the word, a Proverbs 31 woman is not being harsh and abrasive and disrespectful.
And Psalm 18, verse 35, your gentleness has made me great. I love that verse because it's really showing greatness is found in gentleness. And so many times people can think meek is weak, but gentleness and meekness are actually great attributes to have in our lives.